Welcome to my channel, Clark Time Media.
Speaking of moments, you've been, as you mentioned, your career with the Fever. First six, though, were tough, obviously. They weren't as easy. You guys have made the playoffs the last two. What's been the big turnaround? How have you viewed the way the team has grown organically?
Then you bring in Caitlin, who changed the world, changed the dynamic of basketball. And as a friend and as a player, you grow to appreciate her because, certain doors have opened because she's come to the Fever, and you have to respect that. And I love the teammate and person in her because she's accepted it with so much grace and even welcomed us with open arms to, make this thing happen. So I think it just took a lot of big pieces to make, what it.
You've probably seen the highlight reels, the buzzer beaters, the endless debates about Caitlin Clark. But what you haven't seen is the story that's been simmering quietly beneath all those headlines. A story about power, influence, and a hidden battle for the future of the NBA. Most people think the drama you saw unfold on the court was just about basketball. A couple of veterans making a few snarky comments, a rookie learning to handle the pressure. Nothing more than healthy competition, right? That's what the official narrative wanted you to believe. But here's the thing. Those scattered moments, the sideways remarks in interviews, the subtle digs on social media, the tense body language during games didn't feel random. If you appreciate this content, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Believe it or not, more than 85% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. It's free and only takes a second, but it means the world to us. So, did you subscribe already? Great. Thank you so much for your support. Now back to the video. They felt connected. And for weeks, fans online have been piecing together the clues like detectives in a true crime mystery. If you're one of them, you weren't imagining it. Because what looked like small jabs from individual players was actually part of something much bigger. A quiet, calculated effort to challenge the rise of Caitlin Clark before she could completely reshape the league. This wasn't about a single bad game or a rookie getting hazed. This was about influence, about protecting legacies, about fear that a 22-year-old rookie was about to change everything. Not just the way the Indiana Fever plays, but the way the entire league is perceived. And that fear led to one of the boldest, but most underestimated power plays in recent WNBA history. A move that insiders now believe was designed to fracture a team from within and pit teammate against teammate. But here's the twist. The whole strategy crumbled before it could even take off. All because of one player they thought they could turn, but who turned out to be their biggest obstacle. In this video, we're going to pull back the curtain on the story you weren't supposed to hear. We'll trace how a handful of veterans allegedly tried to orchestrate a quiet rebellion inside the Fever's locker room, why they chose the teammate they believed could break Caitlin Clark's momentum from the inside, and how that single decision backfired in a way that may have changed the future of the league. So, if you've ever suspected the headlines were only showing you half the story, stick around because what we uncovered makes every headline you've read about Caitlin Clark look like just the tip of the iceberg. If you only followed the headlines, you'd think there was nothing to see here. According to the league's public narrative, any tension surrounding Caitlin Clark's arrival was perfectly normal. A little rookie hazing, a bit of competitive fire, maybe a few veterans reminding the new kid that nothing comes easy in the pros. That was it. At least that's what we were told. For months, that was the script we kept hearing. It's just tough love. Veterans testing a rookie. The media is blowing it out of proportion. It sounded tidy. Too tidy. Every time a veteran's comment went viral, whether it was a sly eye roll, a pointed remark about hype, or a not-so-subtle jab about rookies needing to earn it, the league's spokespeople and partner media outlets were quick to explain it away. They framed it as healthy competition and insisted the fans were reading too much into it. But the more they repeated that explanation, the less it made sense. Fans noticed the pattern, the timing of certain interviews, the consistency of the digs, the way similar talking points kept popping up from players in completely different markets. It stopped feeling like coincidence and started to feel like choreography. And that's when the cracks in the official story started to show, because if these were just random outbursts of competitiveness, why did they always seem to point in the same direction toward Caitlin Clark? Why did it feel less like spontaneous rivalries and more like a coordinated resistance? Social media was the first place these suspicions took root. Threads on Reddit, TikTok breakdowns on Twitter, posts dissecting press conference clips frame by frame. Fans began to piece together a narrative that was bigger than a single player or a few heated moments. They sensed there was a pattern, a quiet campaign to control the story before Clark could own it. The league's answer was always the same. You're imagining things, but there's something about sports fans, especially WNBA fans. They notice everything. The small details that don't add up, the lines between the lines, the moments that feel too perfectly timed. By late summer, the healthy competition explanation was wearing thin. Too many subtle digs, too many coordinated talking points, too much smoke for there not to be at least a little fire. That's when people started asking a bigger question. If this wasn't just random, who stood to gain from slowing down the Caitlin Clark wave? And why was the Indiana Fever of all teams at the center of it? Those questions are where the official story ends and the unofficial one begins.
And it's in.
That unofficial story where the real drama and the first hints of a deliberate plan finally come into focus. Once you start looking past the headlines, the pattern is hard to ignore. The digs aimed at Caitlin Clark weren't random pot shots. They weren't just the heat of the moment after a tough loss or the kind of playful jabs that usually come with the rookie first season. According to multiple insider reports and fan-driven investigations, what we saw was part of something far more calculated. A quiet strategy to slow down Clark's rise before it rewrote the league's balance of power. Here's how the alleged plan worked. First, they didn't attack her directly, with anything obvious. That would have been too risky, too easy to spot, too likely to backfire. Instead, the effort was subtle, slow-moving. It lived in sideways comments during interviews, cold shoulders during warm-ups, whispers about media darlings, and unearned hype. The goal wasn't to ruin her image in the press overnight. It was to chip away at her influence inside her own locker room. They wanted to plant a seed of resentment, not with the fans, but with her teammate. If they could convince even one key player on the Fever that Clark was being handed everything she hadn't yet earned, the dominoes might start to fall. Resentment spreads fast in a locker room when a season is long and the spotlight isn't shared equally. At the heart of this strategy was an old but reliable play in professional sport. Divide and conquer. If the Indiana Fever's chemistry could be fractured, then Clark's on-court success would feel hollow. Her rise would be slowed from within, not by rival defenses, but by the weight of her own team's mistrust. It sounds ruthless, but there's a reason this kind of tactic has been used for decades. Sports dynasties aren't just beaten on the court, they're often broken in the locker room. And in this case, the architects of the alleged plan believed they had the perfect target to ignite that internal conflict. To them, it was simple math. Take one veteran who's given everything to a struggling franchise, but never reaped the rewards. Add a rookie who arrives with instant celebrity treatment, endorsements, and headlines as the league's savior. Stir in years of frustration and the sting of being overlooked, and you get a perfect recipe for tension. And that's why their eyes turned to one player, Kelsey Mitchell. She wasn't just any player. She was the cornerstone of the Fever long before Clark's arrival. A former first-round pick who had survived losing season after losing season, holding the franchise together, while the rest of the league barely noticed. From a strategic perspective, it made perfect sense. If you wanted to destabilize a team from the inside, you wouldn't go after a rookie or a bench player. You'd go after the heartbeat, the one teammate whose voice carried enough weight to tilt the mood of the entire locker room. In their minds, if Mitchell so much as hinted at frustration, one comment about earning your stripes, one clipped answer to a reporter's question, it could validate every skeptical remark made by veterans around the league. It would prove their point without them having to say another word. This was the heart of the alleged plan, not to silence Caitlin Clark, but to isolate her. And all they needed was for Kelsey Mitchell to take the bait. But as the next chapter of this story shows, the person they believed was their greatest asset would become the one who blew the entire scheme apart before it even had a chance to succeed. To understand why Kelsey Mitchell became the centerpiece of this quiet power struggle, you first have to understand the journey that shaped her. Kelsey Mitchell isn't just another name on the Fever's roster. For nearly a decade, she was the Indiana Fever, the face of a franchise that for years felt like it was trapped in basketball purgatory, always rebuilding, rarely winning, and often forgotten by the national media. When Mitchell was drafted in 2018, there was hope she could be the spark to reignite the team's legacy. But what followed was a brutal stretch of seasons that tested everything a player could endure. 6 straight losing seasons, 5 different head coaches, constant roster changes, and night after night, she had to walk onto the court knowing that the odds were stacked against her. She wasn't just scoring points, she was carrying the burden of keeping the Fever relevant enough to survive. And when the team inevitably fell short, she was the one facing reporters after another crushing loss. Speaking with professionalism about building blocks and progress, even when there was little progress to show, there's a certain kind of toughness that comes from years like that. The kind that doesn't show up on a stat sheet. Mitchell became the anchor, the steady presence, who refused to quit even as the franchise drifted further into obscurity. And then came Caitlin Clark. Almost overnight, the narrative flipped. The same franchise that Mitchell had kept afloat suddenly had a new face, a new savior, a rookie who hadn't yet spent a single season enduring the grind that Mitchell had endured for years. Clark was hailed as the spark to save the Fever. And, according to some headlines, even the WNBA itself. For outsiders looking in, it wasn't hard to imagine how that might feel. The player who had been the heart of the team for years was now being cast as a supporting character in someone else's story. This is exactly why the alleged architects of the anti-Clark strategy believed Mitchell would be the perfect opening. They assumed she'd already be feeling overlooked, maybe even a little resentful that deep down she'd shared their skepticism about Clark's meteoric rise. In their eyes, she wasn't just another veteran. She was the credible voice they needed. Any frustration coming from her wouldn't look like bitterness. It would look like the justified perspective of a battle-tested leader finally speaking her truth after years in the shadows. From a strategic standpoint, it was a calculated gamble that made sense on paper. Mitchell had paid her dues. She had earned her stripes the hard way. She had the respect of her teammates and the credibility of the league. If she questioned Clark's spotlight, fans might listen. But this is where the architects made their biggest mistake. They thought they knew Kelsey Mitchell, but they didn't. Mitchell's years of hardship hadn't hardened her against her team's future. If anything, they made her fiercely protective of it. Instead of resenting Caitlin Clark, Mitchell saw her as the missing piece to the puzzle she'd been trying to solve for years. She wasn't interested in relitigating who deserved the spotlight. She was focused on building a winning culture and finally giving Fever fans something to believe in again. The very quality that made her the perfect target. Her loyalty to the franchise was the same quality that made her immune to the plan. What the architects failed to realize was that Kelsey Mitchell wasn't waiting for her moment to reclaim the spotlight. She was waiting for the right teammate to share it with. And that realization would flip the entire power struggle on its head. Because when the moment finally came for Mitchell to speak publicly about her new rookie teammate, she didn't give them the soundbite they were hoping for. She gave them something else entirely. A statement so unexpected that it dismantled the entire anti-Clark narrative in less than a minute. The moment Kelsey Mitchell finally spoke to the cameras, the strategy that had been months in the making began to unravel in real time. The veterans and insiders who allegedly tried to pull her into their circle believed they had done their homework. They'd chosen their target carefully. The longest tenure player on a franchise that had spent most of the last decade losing. A player who had shouldered the burden while watching her own prime years slip away. In their minds, resentment was inevitable. All they needed was a microphone in front of her and a question about Caitlin Clark's spotlight, and the dam would break. But the dam never broke. Instead of a frustrated veteran, they were met with a calm, measured leader who turned the entire narrative inside out. Rather than grumble about Clark's hype or her rookie fame, Mitchell did the opposite. She praised her teammates' grace under pressure. She credited Clark for changing not just the team, but in her own words, changing the world. Those weren't throwaway compliments. They were direct hits to the heart of the campaign meant to cast Clark as an overhyped newcomer. That single choice of words landed like a thunderclap. Calling a rookie a world changer isn't the kind of thing you say if you're secretly jealous or if you're buying into the whispers about unearned hype. It was an open declaration that she believed Clark's arrival had been good for everyone. The Fever, the league, even the veterans who had been skeptical. And just like that, the wedge that the architects hoped to drive between the two players crumbled to dust. Mitchell's next line was the final blow. Looking straight into the cameras, she said fans and players alike had better learn to appreciate Clark, not as a rival, but as someone who would open doors for the entire league. That one sentence reframed the entire debate. What had been pitched as a battle for credit suddenly looked petty in comparison to the bigger picture Mitchell had drawn. The miscalculation ran deeper than underestimating Mitchell's loyalty. The architects assumed that old-school tactics, playing on egos, staring quiet rivalries would work in a locker room built on mutual respect. They tried to wage a cultural war in an environment that had already moved on from it. Mitchell's public show of unity made it clear that the Fever's core wasn't interested in old guard politics. They were united by chemistry, ambition, and a shared vision of the future. In trying to recruit Mitchell, the architects revealed the limits of their own influence. They believed the same resentment that once fueled feuds in past eras would still work today. But what they found instead was a player whose loyalty to her team outweighed any personal frustration and whose leadership had already hardened into something they couldn't bend. The supposed centerpiece of their plan became the person who burned the blueprint on live television, and in doing so exposed just how out of step their strategy was with the new reality of the league. The question that lingered after Kelsey Mitchell's interview was as unavoidable as it was uncomfortable. If there really was an effort to fracture the Fever's chemistry, who was behind it? This is where the story crosses from confirmed events into the realm of rumor, fan theories, and online detective work. It's important to be clear, no one involved has admitted to coordinating anything. There's no smoking gun email. No public confession. What we have are patterns of comments, moments that felt too similar to be coincidence, and a conversation that has been unfolding in the public square, especially on social media. The first names to surface again and again in these conversations were two of the biggest figures in women's basketball. Las Vegas Aces superstar A'ja Wilson and WNBA legend Sheryl Swoopes. Fans pointed to interviews, podcast clips, and press conference remarks where both appeared to question the hype around Caitlin Clark or emphasize that rookies still have to prove themselves. On their own, these comments could easily be chalked up to normal competitive pride. But the online narrative trackers, the timing of those remarks, often coinciding with heated moments in the season, felt less like coincidence and more like coordinated pushback. It's worth pausing here to note that none of these players or commentators have confirmed such intentions. The suggestion that they were architects comes largely from fan speculation. Many of the supposed clues are just that, clues. A raised eyebrow during a sideline interview, a pointed line in a post-game Q&A, a social media post that can be read two ways. The internet has a way of stitching these fragments into a bigger picture, whether that picture is accurate or not. Still, the speculation grew because the theory itself made a certain kind of emotional sense. Wilson and Swoopes aren't fringe figures. They're part of the sport's backbone. Women who fought through years when the WNBA was barely covered. Who battled for sponsorships and pay raises when the cameras weren't watching. Who carried the league through lean years with little fanfare. From that perspective, it's not hard to imagine how suddenly seeing a rookie arrive to massive endorsement deals, wall-to-wall coverage, and being called the savior of the league could feel like the history of their struggles was being erased overnight. To some fans, that fear of erasure was the real fuel behind the alleged pushback. Not simple jealousy, but a defensive instinct, an effort, however clumsy, to remind the world, we were here first, and we built the foundation you're now celebrating. Others see it differently, arguing that the entire idea of a coordinated plan is more myth than reality. That what we're really seeing are a few unfiltered comments amplified by social media until they look like a movement. Both interpretations can be true to a point. Legacy and change often collide in sports, especially when a fresh face becomes the face of the league overnight. But whether you believe there was a calculated strategy or just a clash of generations amplified by the internet, the outcome was the same. The old guard appeared to be resisting the tide of the new era. That perceived resistance is what gave the speculation its power. Because once fans started connecting dots between specific remarks and the bigger shifts happening in the WNBA, It didn't matter whether there was a formal plan. The perception of one was enough to spark a narrative battle that played out in every comment section and talk show debate all season long. In the end, the mystery of the architects may never be fully solved. What's undeniable is that the storyline exposed the fault line inside the league. A tension between honoring the players who built the WNBA's foundation and embracing the newcomers whose popularity is now propelling it into a new spotlight. Every generation in sports eventually hits a crossroads. That moment when the athletes who once carried the torch look up and realize someone new is suddenly holding it. For the WNBA, Caitlin Clark's arrival marked one of those moments. And it created a tension that was bigger than any single game or rivalry. It was a collision of eras. The old guard who fought for years to keep the league alive versus the new guard who walked in with viral fame and global attention already at their backs. For the veterans, it was personal in a way that stats can't measure. Many of them came into the league when attendance was sparse, media coverage was inconsistent, and endorsement deals were nearly impossible to land. They spent years playing for modest salaries, traveling on cramped schedules, battling for every ounce of visibility, all while carrying the weight of proving that women's professional basketball deserved to exist at all. Now, imagine waking up one morning and seeing a rookie, someone who hadn't yet played a single pro minute, receive endorsement contracts worth millions, dominate headlines, and be described as the player who will save the league. For some veterans, that wasn't just hype. It felt like their struggles were being erased in real time. On the other side stood the new guard, Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, Lexi Hall, Kelsey Mitchell. Though Mitchell had one foot in both worlds and a W of younger players who came into the league not apologizing for their popularity, they represented a new era where social media clout, nil deals, and global streaming meant a player could enter the WNBA already known to millions. To the younger generation, this wasn't disrespect to the veterans. It was progress. The visibility that players like Clark brought in wasn't seen as a threat. It was seen as a rising tide lifting everyone. For them, the influx of sponsorship money and new fans wasn't about erasing history, but finally getting the league the recognition it always deserved. This was the heart of the clash. Legacy versus momentum. The old guard wanted respect for the battles they fought when nobody was watching. The new guard wanted to push forward without being weighed down by the past. Both were fighting for the league's soul, but they were pulling in different directions. The Indiana Fever became the perfect symbol of this conflict, a franchise where the two worlds literally shared the same locker room. Kelsey Mitchell embodied the bridge between them. A veteran with years of scars from rebuilding seasons, yet someone who understood the importance of embracing a teammate who could change the franchise's trajectory overnight. This is where the so-called Indiana firewall began to take shape. Instead of letting the clash of eras tear them apart, the Fever core chose unity over resentment. Mitchell, Clark, Boston, and Hall built a culture around mutual respect where a rookie phenom and a seasoned veteran could stand side by side as equals. Meanwhile, the veterans outside the locker room who were skeptical of Clark's impact, whether fairly or unfairly, started to look like they were fighting yesterday's battle. They were trying to protect a legacy in a league that was already rewriting its future. That's the irony of the old guard versus new guard dynamic. It was never really about one being right and the other being wrong. It was about change happening faster than anyone expected and the growing pains that come with it. But if there's one takeaway from this chapter of the story, it's that the teams that adapt to the new reality, that learn to blend legacy with momentum, will be the ones shaping the next decade of the WNBA. And in the middle of it all, Indiana's locker room proved that respect and chemistry could be more powerful than any rivalry, no matter how deep the generational divide. For months, the quiet resistance against Caitlin Clark looked, at least to those who believed in it, like a clever chess move. Play the long game. Stir just enough tension to make the locker room uneasy. Let the rookie spotlight feel like a weight instead of a boost. In theory, it could slow the momentum of the Caitlin Clark effect without any single person having to throw a punch in public. But the entire approach was built on an outdated assumption that ego and jealousy still ruled the locker room the way they had in earlier eras of the league. That if you poked at pride long enough, old grudges would surface and start eating away at team chemistry. That's not what they found in Indiana. What they ran into instead was something that hadn't been accounted for. Genuine chemistry. The Fever's core didn't see each other as rivals fighting for space. They saw each other as pieces of a bigger puzzle. And no one embodied that more than Kelsey Mitchell. Her open support of Clark live on camera acted like a shield over the locker room. It was as if she drew a line in the sand and said, "Whatever story you're trying to write about us, it ends here." The architects, whoever they may have been, underestimated the power of that unity. They also underestimated the changing landscape of the WNBA itself. This wasn't the league of a decade ago, where success often came down to individual battles for recognition in a small spotlight. With new TV deals, booming ticket sales, social media buzz, and fresh sponsorship money flowing in, the economics of the league had shifted. The younger players understood that Clark's popularity meant bigger paydays, bigger audiences, and better opportunities for everyone, not fewer. One of the most telling moments came when Mitchell joked publicly that the team was not speaking Brooks anymore because of the surge in revenue and attention. It was lighthearted, but it cut straight to the truth. In this new era, the real rivalry wasn't between teammates or generations. It was between the league's past limitations and its future potential. Players were no longer just competing for the ball. They were competing for a share of a much larger pie. And Clark's presence was helping the pie grow. The old strategy, whisper campaigns, subtle jabs, attempts to gatekeep the spotlight, simply couldn't keep up with that reality. Fans weren't buying it, sponsors weren't buying it, and the Fever's locker room had no interest in tearing itself apart. Instead of dividing the team, the effort to undermine Clark became the thing that unified it. Mitchell's defense of her rookie teammate transformed what could have been a fault line into common ground. And that's how the supposed architects of the plan lost their leverage. Their influence crumbled, not because they were shouted down, but because their tactics belonged to a version of the league that no longer existed. A league where resentment might have worked as fuel has now shifted to one where partnership pays better on the court and off. In the end, the collapse of the old strategy revealed a bigger truth. The WNBA's future isn't being built on rivalry-driven drama anymore. It's being built on alliances between rookies and veterans, between teams and their fans, between the league's past and its next chapter. The very forces that were supposed to fracture the Fever ended up fortifying them instead. And for the veterans who tried to slow the wave, the season became a stark reminder that influence isn't inherited, it's earned all over again in every new era. When the season began, most fans expected the usual headlines, rookie highlights, tough road games, the standard battles for playoff spots. Few could have predicted that the real drama would unfold off the court, hidden in glances, interviews, and whispers that hinted at something bigger. A tug-of-war over the soul of the league. What started as a supposed plan to slow down a rookie's rise became something much larger. A test of whether the WNBA would cling to the rivalries of the past or step boldly into a new era built on collaboration and growth. In the end, that so-called plan never stood a chance. It was dismantled not by a press release or an official investigation, but by a single veteran player who understood the stakes were bigger than personal pride. Kelsey Mitchell's choice to stand beside Caitlin Clark instead of against her not only shielded her teammate, it sent a message to the entire league. The future belongs to those who build, not those who tear down. The verdict is clear. The old playbook, the subtle digs, the backroom politics, the attempts to gatekeep a spotlight no longer works in a league powered by new fans, new money, and new expectations. The game has changed, and so have the players who define it. But there's another layer to this verdict, one that's harder to quantify. Respect. The veterans who came before deserve it for fighting through years when the league was often overlooked, for laying the foundation that made this surge of attention even possible. Their legacy is real, and it shouldn't be forgotten. At the same time, the new generation deserves the room to lead the league into its next chapter without being asked to apologize for the opportunities that never existed before. Progress often feels like a spotlight shifting, but the truth is the brighter the spotlight gets, the more it can illuminate everyone who's earned their place on the court.
So here's the
final question we're leaving you with. Was this season a changing of the guard, Or was it a reminder that the past and future of the WNBA can thrive together if they choose collaboration over rivalry? Drop your verdict in the comments below. Do you think Kelsey Mitchell's stand signaled the start of a new era, or was it just one moment in an ongoing battle for influence inside the league? If you followed this story all the way through, you already know one thing. The real stories in sports are rarely the ones we're handed in headlines. They're the ones that unfold in the spaces between them, in the quiet decisions that change everything. If you believe those stories deserve to be told, hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves the game, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive. Because in a league that's rewriting history in real time, this season's verdict is only the